And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Thursday, October 9th, 2025. And there's a lot to talk about. In setting things up, we have a storm system weakening now off of the northwest Arctic coast, off of Utqiagvik. Still strong southwesterly flow up here, still gale force winds. We have coastal flood warnings and advisories still in effect along this area, especially just east of Utqiagvik, down along the northwest coast and into Kotzebue Sound. And we have high surf advisories or coastal flood advisories for areas of eastern Norton Sound. But the winds will be coming down later this Thursday and certainly by Friday. There is a front and low pressure out through the western Aleutians, storm force winds for the western into the central Aleutians this Thursday into Thursday night. That front, as it comes northeastward, will tend to weaken, but it's what's coming up later in the weekend as we go through Saturday into Sunday. The remnants of a typhoon are going to cross the central Aleutians around noon on Saturday before lifting across the Bering Sea and intensifying further as it tracks toward the west side of St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Strait as we get into later Sunday and early Monday. But in the meantime, areas of fog possible. We had some dense fog advisories this Thursday morning in the Panhandle around Juneau, Petersburg, down to Prince of Wales Island. We've also had some areas of snow north of Fairbanks and on up toward the southern slopes here of the Brooks Range below Adigan Pass. That will be laying out come Friday morning. Still find some pockets of IFR in the northern Panhandle, as well as eastern part of the Brooks Range and along parts higher terrain there north and east of Fairbanks and down along the west arm of Alaska Range. With the frontal system out here across the lower Bering into the eastern Aleutians, central and eastern Aleutians IFR for Friday afternoon as that front comes eastward with some showers and stronger at least gale force winds. We anticipate IFR conditions from St. Matthew down through and east of the Pribilovs into the eastern Aleutians Pacific side of the lower end of the Alaska Peninsula. Improving conditions along the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle, VFR there, and a pocket of IFR conditions eastern North Slope up toward Kaktovik and Deadhorse. And then come Saturday morning, the remnants of that front IFR conditions, St. Lawrence down along the YK Delta to western Bristol Bay and along the Pacific side of the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. But then we're going to have this stronger low pressure, the remnants of what was Typhoon Halong, tracking northeastward. And this system will deepen as it crosses the central and northern Bering, so you want to stay tuned to later forecast impacts along areas of the west coast, especially Bering Strait, western southern part of the Seward Peninsula. The outer Yukon coast could be impacted later this weekend. But IFR conditions expected there from the Bering Strait all the way down along the west coast into the eastern Aleutians and the Pacific side of the Alaska Range up into the west arm of the Alaska Range and the Alaska Peninsula there for Saturday afternoon. Anaktuvik Pass will generally see MVFR conditions for Friday, Adigan Pass IFR as we head over toward Lake Clark and Merrill. Maybe a little MVFR conditions there at Merrill Pass, but essentially becoming VFR for Friday. Rainy Pass also VFR conditions, as will Windy Pass. Extending eastward, though, Isabel Pass may see MVFR conditions hold on throughout Friday, as will Mentasta Pass. And then finally down through the Copper River Basin, VFR conditions at Tanita Pass, Portage Pass VFR. And Chilkoot and White starting out with IFR conditions Friday morning, giving way to VFR conditions. And looking at the freezing levels, and the surface freezing line will extend up through the Bering Strait to Kotzebue Sound and then across along the middle Yukon up into the Yukon Flats and then back down into areas of the southern and southeast mainland. Notice that the freezing levels aloft are highest south of Haida Gwaii, 10, 12, 14,000 feet as you get off of Vancouver Island. But back here to the west with this front, this occluded front that will be weakening as it heads northeastward into Friday night, Saturday morning. It will have some rain and gusty winds with it, but not as strong as the storm force winds affecting the western half of the Aleutians on this Thursday. and those storm force winds will extend into the central Aleutians as we go through later today and this Thursday night. But ahead of it, we find freezing levels bumping upward 8,000 feet through the central lower Bering and 10,000 feet south of the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. But where we do have the precipitation producing clouds that are thicker, freezing levels where we might encounter icing, it's pretty high, above 12 and even 16,000 feet. We find an area, or I should say below 12 and 16,000 feet. And then for an area up here along the Arctic coast below 10,000 feet there, between roughly New Exit on over toward east of Kaktovik. So the upper level jet stream winds, there is a band of stronger winds at 30,000 feet, upwards of 125 knots over the southeast mainland. But behind me, it's this jet core that's going to be part of this remnant of the typhoon that's going to be coming across the Aleutians here, central Aleutians, on Saturday midday. But we have 160 knot southwesterly jet at 30,000 feet. As we bring it down to 9,000 feet, we find the initial, this is the low that we're dealing with today that's out toward the western Bering, southwest corner of the Bering and western Aleutians, but a broad belt of winds 50 to 60 knots with southwesterly flow coming up at mid-level, 700 millibars up from the North Pacific. Across the Gulf and just off of the Panhandle there, winds are out of the northwest, generally in the 35 to 45 knot range. And then at 3,000 feet, you can clearly see this initial lead occluded front that will be weakening, and winds right along and ahead of it, 50, 60, even 65, 80 knots there along the Kamchatka coast. And we have a broad south-southwesterly flow coming up out of the North Pacific there for Friday. Again, that remnants of the typhoon is below the screen at this point, but it will be crossing the central Aleutians around noon or early afternoon on Saturday before tracking up through the central Bering and deepening as it approaches the west end of St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Strait later Sunday, early Monday. So turbulence on Friday with that front that's out to the west. We expect moderate turbulence, parts of the Alaska Peninsula extending out through the Aleutian chain, surface to 4,000 feet. And then as we get up along areas of the west, southwest coast, Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, especially around Cape Newingham, below 4,000 feet, below 3,000 feet there on St. Lawrence Island. And then we also find some moderate turbulence below 4,000 feet, especially there around the vicinity of Prince of Wales Island then for Friday, especially there by afternoon.